Welcome back to Outside Views, and today we are popping the hood on the British car industry to look at the engine of its destruction. The specific rules of origin hurdles that are currently costing billions of pounds. And my personal view is that the British automotive sector is being slowly strangled by a red tape curtain that was entirely foreseeable and entirely avoidable. We are already in 2026, and while the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders is putting a brave face on things by highlighting a £115 billion trade total, the underlying reality is a nightmare of bureaucracy. The rules of origin are the hidden tax of Brexit. They are the complex requirements that a car must be sufficiently British or European to qualify for the zero tariffs promised in the trade deal. And in 2026, these rules have become a financial sinkhole, with the industry warning that the administrative burden alone is costing UK businesses an estimated £15 billion a year across all sectors, with automotive bearing the brunt. It's kind of tragic irony that a country that once prided itself on just-in-time manufacturing is now stuck in just-in-case paperwork. And the real cliff edge of 2025 has been the looming transition for electric vehicles and their batteries. Initially, the UK and EU were supposed to implement much tougher rules in 2024, but they agreed to a one-off extension until December 31st, 2026. And my view is that this wasn't a victory for British negotiation. It was a desperate stay of execution because the UK simply hasn't built the battery gigafactories it needs to meet the content requirements. And to avoid a 10% tariff, 45% of an EV's value and 60% of its battery pack must originate in the UK or EU right now. But from January 2027, which is now less than 12 months away, those thresholds jump to 55% for the vehicle and 70% for the battery. The SMMT has warned that if the UK cannot scale up its domestic supply chain for cathode active materials by then, British-made EVs will become up to 22% more expensive to export than they were before. And this is a slow-motion disaster that is already deterring investment, as manufacturers like Stellantis and Nissan have to weigh the cost of British production against the tariff-free ease of the continent. But it isn't just the future threat of 2027 that is hurting. It is the daily death by 1,000 cuts from the current customs regime. Since January 2025, the UK has implemented the full safety and security declaration requirements, and the transition to the ICS2 system for road and rail has added another layer of digital complexity. Every single component crossing the border, every spark plug, every seat belt, every microchip, now requires a proof of origin. If a British car uses a specialized sensor from Taiwan or a chip from South Korea, the manufacturer has to spend thousands of man-hours proving that the rest of the car is British enough to balance it out. And industry experts estimate that these non-tariff barriers add an average of 8 to 9% to the cost of doing business, effectively wiping out the profit margins for many smaller suppliers. We are seeing a hollowing out of the UK supply chain as smaller firms, unable to cope with the 270 million customs declarations now required annually, simply stop exporting altogether. And the external pressure in 2025 has only made things worse, with global trade protectionism hitting the UK from all sides. The US has imposed its own tariffs on British passenger vehicles, and the EU is planning to double its standard tariff on steel imports to 50%. Because the UK is outside the EU's protective bubble, it's caught in the crossfire of a global trade war without any allies to back it up. And the UK government is currently begging for quota-based exemptions for steel, but the EU is holding all the cards. And my strong personal view is that the global Britain dream has been exposed as a fantasy where the UK is not a free agent, but a small, isolated player being bullied by the big blocs. And the automotive industry is the canary in the coal mine, and right now that canary is struggling to breathe under the weight of certificates, declarations and rules of origin forms. And the outside view is that the British car industry is effectively being taxed for its own existence. The government talks about industrial strategy and provides £2 billion in funding, but that's just a drop in the ocean compared to the £15 billion being lost to Brexit red tape every single year. You cannot subsidize your way out of a structural trade disadvantage that you intentionally chose. And unless the UK moves back toward a customs union, and I mean the real way, realizing that the sovereignty of choosing your own spark plug tariffs is not worth the collapse of your manufacturing base. And the British car industry will continue to shrink. I mean, how much real British car industry is there still? The 2026 review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is the last chance to fix this, but it's only going to be some technical stuff. There will be no changes to the TCA itself. But with the current political paralysis, I am not holding my breath anyway. The red tape curtain is closed, and for the British car industry, the lights are starting to dim.